All right, hello and welcome to another episode of Steelfur Speaks. I'm once again joined by my lovely co-host Dashi. Say hello, Dashi. No, look over here. Come on, look at the camera. Come on, come on. Be cute for everyone. Okay, there she is. She's currently having been bored all day while I was at work. Is what is going on. Anyway, we are here today to talk about Project Blue. If you've been following my newly launched, as of 2 weeks ago, weekly Sunday segment called Steelfur on Sunday, you'll all be familiar with Project Blue. Steelfur on Sunday is a new weekly news segment. The episodes are 10 minutes long, ideally no more, summarizing all of the latest news that's happening in Flesh and Blood and the world of Flesh and Blood. And hilariously, 2 weeks after I launched it, LSS have turned around and launched their own weekly World Tour updates. So, once again, I have proved myself to be a trend setter. Other areas that I have also proved to be a trendsetter is in requesting and saying that there were problems with Blitz. And I have well documented lots of episodes saying, look, Blitz is a fundamentally flawed format. And the reason and the justification behind that is simply that one of the greatest things about the game of Flesh and Blood is that you can make decisions and make mistakes, and then if you play well after that mistake, you can recover. And you have windows to have bad turns and good turns and outplay your opponent because the bad turns are well within your control. And I firmly believe that in Classic Constructed, and I mean the German government has also agreed this, Flesh and Blood is entirely a game of skill, and outside specific high roll opportunities, players will ultimately, most of the time, the game will come down to not just will come down to the skill of the player, and that skill is expressed both in the deck building stage, but also in the actual gameplay stage, right? And obviously there is variation in every card game, but I firmly believe that is true of Classic Constructed. I don't believe it's true of Living Legend, and I don't believe it's true of Blitz. I think Blitz is a swingy format, which you don't actually have any runway to recover from having a bad turn or something going wrong. You kind of do just have to take your lumps and hope that you can, do something while you still have health to do it. So, it's not so easy to recover or to have things go correctly, is what I'll say to you, right? And LSS have kind of acknowledged this as well, right? So in his keynote on the stage at Pro Tour London, James White said that they know that Blitz has this problem where the power level is as high as Classic Constructed, but there is not an opportunity to pivot or come back from having a bad turn. So he has acknowledged it, and they said there would be solutions tested to see what would happen with Blitz a long time, or in the near-term future. And we've kind of seen that has started to happen. Now, when I was talking about Blitz last year, I kind of said, look, realistically, what needs to happen is you need to remove a lot of the power level from Blitz. And what does that mean in practice? It means getting rid of crazy 0 for 4s. It means getting rid of a lot of the Majestics that fuel power levels. It means, sadly, getting rid of a lot of legendaries, right? But the point that I emphasized then, and the point that I do continue to emphasize, is that Flesh and Blood is a game built on the back of the strength of its commons and rares, right? Legendaries are fantastic, and they obviously warp the game, but they're worth the money you spend on them. But your deck will still be made up majority, unless you're playing Assassin, of commons and rares. It's not something, that you can get away from. Every class has staple commons and rares that go into every deck. And that's why a lot of people have adopted the commoner format and find it quite fun, because the game is full of strong commons. And I said, and I firmly believe, that Blitz needs to grow closer to that fan format Clash, where the only cards that heroes are allowed to play are commons, rares, and specialization Majestics, right? So, and I think there's an exception made for some Majestic equipment, but most Majestic equipment isn't allowed. But the point is, you're deliberately depowering a format by removing all Majestics except specialization cards. And most heroes do not have a lot of specialization cards. Most heroes have a couple specialization cards, so you can kind of get away with having one per deck. And then if you needed to, you can maybe limit them as limit one per deck. So you can only have one Arclight Sentinel, for example, something like that. Right, would work fine as well. So that's kind of Clash. And from that idea of Clash, we now have the rise of something called Project Blue. An event was made in Card Merchant in New Zealand, basically saying, hey, come and test Project Blue, and you can get this special promo, and there's a gold foil on the line. And that led to a website, which then led to a Discord, and that Discord is basically going to be the home of LSS's card game testing in the future, with both alpha and beta ideas being tested on that server. Alpha ideas will be limited to players in New Zealand, because obviously they want to test some stuff before it goes live, and beta ideas people will be able to play test from without the world. For this first one, we have already had leaks of the alpha ideas, and I imagine that was unintentional. I imagine they're working on the system and they kind of need a more robust NDA or a way to just verify who's taking part in the alpha and more explicit instructions on what is kept secret for the next ideas that get rolled out. But as things currently stand, we have a leak of what Project Blue entails, and it is this blitz that has everything that isn't a common or a rare taken out of it, as well as a separate ban list, which we'll get to in a minute. To start off from that foundation, it's a blitz format where you have 20 life or whatever it is on the young hero. No heroes of living legended yet because it's a new format, and you have all these commons and rares available to you. So let's just have a quick look at this ban list, and I'll talk about why I like it so much, right? So the goal of the Project Blue ban list is to remove a lot of the power from the game. And you can kind of see that immediately in the equipment. Heart and Cross Strap, Ether Ironweed, Goliath Gauntlet, definitely Rosetta Thorn. I still don't have one of these EA Rosetta Thorns. I really want one. The price is crazy. Snapdragon Scalers, Stubby Hammers, of course, Waning Moon, Zephyr Needle, all gone. Right. Then we get down into the actual list, and you can see things get a lot more interesting. So Ether Flare is an interesting choice to remove, but of course, it does allow Kano to scale his damage quite crazily, which will blow people out in one turn. Ball Lightning, that's pretty obvious. Belittle's pretty obvious. Bonds of Ancestry is pretty obvious. And then you start to get into a few more interesting ones. The Count Your Blessing is removed, obviously, because it increases the power of fatigue decks to stall people out. Drone of Brutality, because it lets decks go to, fatigue and win consistently. Then you have all of these defense reactions, like Fate Foreseen, Flick Flack coming out, Sink Below and Sigil of Solace. So clearly a deliberate attempt to remove a lot of the sort of like fatigue power from the format, which kind of reflects the fact that a lot of what people needed to do, to break through these fatigue decks was to use power and was to use Majestics to get through those. Electromagnetic Somersault, probably just a bit too aggressive. Plunder Run, just a bit too aggressive. Rate the Embers, obviously just such a powerful card to get 3 Ash Wings on the board and then use those to chip away at your opponent while they don't have cards to deal with them. Deadwood Dirge, probably just too good with the amount of rune chance it can generate. Ruban Carapace is probably just a bit too defensive. Seeds of Agony is banned because Chain is legal, and Seeds of Agony plus Chain equals crazy things with Riftbind. Cash In, just for the amount of cards that it can draw, especially with gold being much easier to generate. And Amulet of Ice, just because it gives you that kind of ability to go above and beyond what your opponent can block in a single turn. So it kind of makes sense to get rid of that as well. I really like this ban list. I really just like how it sort of looks like they've taken a lot of power out of the format. And then if we go into the decks, you'll see there's already quite a few decks kind of kicking around. If we just look at a few of them, you'll kind of get an understanding that people are quite enthusiastic about this format. And they're kind of coming up with some interesting things that they're doing in the format, right? So I listened to, or I spoke to Philip from February, and he said that in the 2 days since he put Project Blue up, and it's disappeared for some reason now, so I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe it's the server thing, but he had Project Blue as a format for a minute. Maybe LSS asked them to take it down, who knows. They might still want this being a beta function rather than something kind of more official, so maybe they asked him to take it down temporarily, right? But he did say that in the 2 days since he put it up, there were 3,253 Project Blue decks. So clearly there is a lot of desire for Project Blue as a format in terms of people who want to experiment. And also clearly there's probably a lot of desire for, a new version of Blitz and a cheap version of Blitz. So if we look at these decks, you'll kind of see they still have a lot of power. You're building an Oldhim deck. He's legal. He hasn't Living Legend. You have Test of Might, Test of Vigor. It's interesting to see these 0 for 4 block cards still in the format. You have stuff like Polar Blast, Winter's Bite, Zealous Belting, Autumn's Touch, Pummels. You still have so many powerful cards just based on the core of Flesh and Blood. Same thing's true about Dash, you know, High Speed Impact, Payload, Throttles, T-Bones, really powerful in this format, Boom Grenades. You can add in a lot of great power, even at the common and rare. And one of the things I will say is the difference between this and Commoner itself is the addition of some very, very powerful, very, very interesting cards. You know, you consider the rares in this deck, you know, the Blade Beckoner Gauntlets, the Evergreens to help you with fatigue, stuff like, not Winter's Bite, stuff like Polar Blast, I think is a rare. You know, you really do get a little bit extra power in above Commoner, which is really cool to see. I think is what's going to make this format quite good. Stuff like Scramble Pulse, for example. And then in Katsu, you actually get to add in a lot of the combo finishers that don't exist in Commoner, right? So you can actually finally play Leg Tap into Rising Knee Thrust into Blackout Kick, which you can't do in a Commoner format, right? So, you know, Katsu becomes viable in this kind of format. I think a lot more decks become viable because they have that final piece of spice, something like Bleed Out, that lets them feel more complete. So that's what Project Blue looks like. Now, let's just sit. Have I had this cover the entire screen the entire time? All right. Well, I'm going to apologize for that, but luckily I have said pretty much everything that I was talking about on the screen, and you just get to look at the dog for the entire time. So I'm not going to re-record. I'm not going to apologize for that. This is the Project Blue Bland list. If you hadn't had a chance to have a look at it, you can kind of see all of the cards involved therein. Let me remove my own face. I'll just put that up on the screen again so you can have a bit of a look at it and see all the cards that have been taken out in case I didn't mention any. I think Ash Rings are legal. They're just not. They're not. Rate the Embers isn't legal. So let's go back to just talking. The dog has jumped down. She doesn't love me anymore. But let's go back just to talk about what I think about Project Blue. And actually, I'm going to give my thoughts, and then I'm going to show you thoughts that I've had from Mansan, who obviously tested this format a lot, and he's done his own video on it, and you can kind of see his thoughts as well. He's a big proponent, like I am, for these cheaper formats that have a lower barrier to entry. So let's start off with that. So my first thought about Project Blue is fantastic, right? Blitz has a problem. The problem is the power level of the cards. We can't go back and just, we don't, and also like you don't want a Blitz only ban list for Majestics that's the length of your arm, right? You want a controlled environment, but you want as many broad sweeping rules as possible. So a broad sweeping rule that says Majestics aren't legal is very clean and it works very well. If you were going to say Majestics aren't legal except for specializations, again, that could work, right? But you'd have to find a way to include some cards that are like specializations but didn't get printed with specialization because of text box size. Or there are some cards like the Transcend cards in Zen and New, which are essentially specializations, but they don't feel like specializations. And you want New to have her Sacred Art, for example. If Prism is getting Arclight Sentinel, then New should get Sacred Art, right? So that's only fair, but you'd have to kind of fix that. But in general, you could have that one Majestic, and maybe someone was allowed to play one of them in their deck instead of two or something like that. But you need those broad sweeping rules. But as a starting point, the idea that we're going to ban all of the Majestics and just have commons and rares, it really does appeal to me, because what do we actually want Blitz to do? Do we want Blitz to be a fast, high-powered format where the games finish quickly? No. We do want the games to finish quickly. We 100% want Blitz games to finish quickly. They need to finish within 15 to 25, maybe max 30 minutes. But we don't want them to drag on for an hour like a CC game. They should be finished quickly. You should be able to play more rounds of Blitz on a weekly armory and those kind of things. Okay. What's the other goal for Blitz? The other big goal. So finish quickly. But not feel like the game just runs away, but not take too long either. Be in that sweet flesh and blood balance point. And that's kind of important. We need Blitz to feel like a full fat game of flesh and blood in terms of back and forth interactions, using life as a resource, pivoting, blocking well, being able to make mistakes and then outplay your opponent when you pitch stack a little bit. All these kind of things that make Fab a great game. That's what we need Blitz to be able to do as well. And currently it's not being able to do that because the format is too fast and there's too much power. The other thing then we need Blitz to be able to do is to be affordable. I had a dream of Blitz, and I talked about this 2 years ago. I said, if we think about what I want from Blitz, I want a fast competitive format which feels like flesh and blood, where I can change decks for less than 20 quid. Right? That's what I said. And I said, take out the Majestics, take out the Legendaries, and you have a deck that I can probably build for about 20 quid or less. And that's assuming that I actually have to buy any of these cards and I can't just get them from friends or from contacts, right? But if I have to go to Card Market and buy them, I imagine each of these cards is about somewhere between 50, 20p each. So I could build a new deck for 20 quid. And then if I want to play Azalea, I can build that. If I want to play Riptide next week, I can build that. If I want to pivot entirely to a different class because someone I play as a Living Legend did, I can do that. And that means that any new player that's coming in, what are we actually asking for them to participate? We're saying, hey, take this deck that's worth 20 quid. I guarantee you, if it becomes the official Blitz format, every store is going to have 20 of these decks in a box. They'll give them away for free. They're really not that expensive to build. People will throw together Project Blue Blitz decks and they'll just give them to new players to play around with. And then suddenly the entry for skirmish season becomes not build a perfect Blitz deck with all the legendaries and everything and CNCs and E-strikes and all the same costs that are associated with Classic Constructed minus one copy of all of these things. It becomes, you can play any deck in the game. You can pivot from one week to the next if you want to. Realistically, you can build any deck in the game and you can have so much fun with whatever ideas you want. And you can experiment. And do you know what? And I feel like this is so important as well. And one of the reasons that being able to pivot quickly in Blitz would be important is you might turn around and say, I love this hero that I played last week for the first time. And that might lead to you buying the cards to upgrade that deck to a full fat Classic Constructed deck. And when you do that, you'll genuinely get a new experience. You'll get a new experience that has cards you've never played with before. It'll be super exciting. You'll have your legendary not from day one, right? One of the things that's really frustrated me about the way that Fab is played, and I do live in London. I live in quite a competitive area. But one of the things that has frustrated me for a long time about how Fab is played is that from the very beginning at an armory, there is pressure to build the best deck possible. And that's partly because we play a lot of CC here, but it's also partly just because everyone is trying to buy that legendary, buy that majestic. They know what other people are playing, and they want to build that deck and feel the full power level. And it's kind of like, why wouldn't you follow the guide and buy the best items in League of Legends if you knew what the best items were and you had the time and the money to go and buy those cards? Why would you play a deck that was less powerful than it could be? And it's kind of a symptom, and we talked about it a lot on this podcast, of like the democratization of TCG decks. And obviously, once there is an aggressive singles market, it becomes possible realistically to build any deck possible. And the assumption has become in trading card games that you will have every card that you need, not just every card that is available to you. And it is very common that when someone pivots to a new class, in order to truly feel the power level of that class, they go out and buy every card that they need to build the best competitive deck of that class. That to me is actually a negative experience, because I feel like one of the best feelings that we've had in trading card games over the years is that limited palette of resources where you don't immediately have every card that you need to play the best version of the deck. And you were kind of slowly accumulating them from locals, or you were kind of constrained in what you could build, what you could buy, and you had to be creative, or you just had to play the deck that it is, and then when you got that card, it felt really, really good. And that's why people for a long time have done like sealed escalation leagues, where you buy 6-packs and then you add 6-packs a week and those kind of things, just for that experience, right? So what do we have at the moment isn't that. People are going into Blitz and everyone is bringing their juiced up decks to Blitz with all the legendaries and majestics, winning the game in a couple of turns, and then new players who are coming in are immediately saying, hey, this first strike deck just doesn't do it, it's not strong enough, and they're buying in all the cards, or they're bouncing out of it, right? One of those two things. And the same thing is true of any other Blitz product that comes out, whether it's these new Blitz CC Armory decks. They're not going to be as good as a fully constructed Blitz deck with every legendary and majestic. And that will lead people either to be frustrated in the entry-level product they just bought, or to bounce out of the game because they look at the cost differential between a Blitz deck that just won a tournament that has 2 E-Strikes, 2 CNCs, 2 Weakest Links, 2 Shelters, all these things in, versus their, I just bought this and upgraded it with like 2 Majestics and 1 Legendary deck, right? And I don't have the generics. So for me, Blitz works best when you can change classes easily with minimal cost investment. You can experiment with a lot of ideas. The power level is reduced but not disappeared, so it feels like you're playing powerful Flesh and Blood but not broken, Flesh and Blood, where the games last a certain amount of time but don't last, forever. And I want it also to be cheap and not as... I literally don't want it to have all the cards that CC does. I want there to be not a marked difference between how many cards you need to build a competitive deck in Blitz versus CC, right? And I want there to be a marked difference so that you can actually go to the other format and feel like you've got the juice, you've powered up, you're taking a step in your progression as a player from casual playing your first Blitz through to I finally finished my CC deck. I took a bit of time before my first CC event, but I kept playing Blitz. Now I've finally got all the cards together and the deck just feels like it's the Blitz version, but it's juiced. Right? It's juiced to the max. And then you go to Living Legend where all the banned cards are legal and you're like, what the hell? My Zen deck went from being able to make some Tigers and doing some damage with them to chasing the tail in Classic Constructed Rip Zen, to banishing a Tiger with Art of War, drawing loads of cards, all this stuff in Living Legend. I want that tier system so that each format actually feels like progression if you start as a new player in one and then you move up through the others, right? I think that's a good goal. That's what I think about Project Blue. I haven't had a chance to play a lot of games yet, but I did reach out on Blue Sky and I got a response from Mansant of Savage Feats fame. Obviously notable caster of Flesh and Blood tournaments. And also one of the things, if you see on his channel, him and I agree very strongly about cost affordable formats, right? Commoner coming in was a really good idea. Clash existing is interesting. The problem is it's not an official format, so hard to get as many people excited about it. But just the idea that the game should be affordable at a base level, and you can see LSS is trying to tackle that with what's it called? Mash Palace, Crack Shuffle Play. But I believe that the constructed side needs to have a cheaper entry point as well. So I asked people for their thoughts online. I got Mansant's opinion. And I'm just going to run through his responses and we can talk about what he said and how we feel about them. So let's make this nice and big for the people sitting in the cheap seats at home. So 15 likes, people are positive, 3,000 decks made is what I tweeted out. Mansan said, I played maybe 50 games or so across Jeremiah and Levia. The lack of D-Reacts actually makes the format pretty fast, so when you remove a lot of those 0 for 4s, it keeps the speed of the format quite high, which is what we predicted and what we hoped. If you mismanage blocking at medium HP, you're going to have to block before your opponent, and then whether you can pivot is a question as to whether you die bleeding to block for. So that's kind of normal. It's kind of to encourage blocking early on to keep your life total high because you don't have that much of it, which is good. Then I said, does it feel like the game rapidly escalates if you block poorly once or twice? The biggest problem with Blitz has always been that you can't make mistakes, and you also don't have the runway to, make mistakes. So if a deck is sending 16 damage, you're going to have to block. You're probably going to take some damage. And then you need a pivot opportunity to make your opponent start blocking. And you don't have the life for that. So that's one of the problems that Blitz needs to fix. By taking down the power level, you reduce the consistency of damage every turn. And that means that there is breathing room, even if you have a bad turn, to succeed. And Mantank kind of said this. He said some decks lack go again when they are ahead, and aggro decks have struggled to do consistent +4 go again. So exactly what we said is removal of the consistency means that there are windows to come back if things go wrong. He does, however, say that the deck can only come back if you pivot off 2 cards plus some armor. But like good Fab is decks that can pivot off 2 cards, right? Consistently, the decks that do well in Flesh and Blood in general are decks where there are good 2-card hands, and that you can do something even if you've already got 2 cards. So that's kind of normal for Fab. Then he said there's smart deck building type play that can keep you ahead of issues, unlike in Blitz where hyper fatigue or hyper aggro is deterministic. Also, he said, we can keep banning problem cards, right? Because once you establish that the format is going to have an aggressive ban list like it currently does, then seeing a new patch that bans certain cards, like he's called out Scar for Scar and Snatch, is doable because people will expect that level of bans from you, right, to tightly control the format. He said people complain about Snatch, but he doesn't agree because people can block with armor and it creates kind of an interesting bit of interplay. Do you think they're going to use Snatch? How are they going to use it? When are they going to use it? And I do agree with him. There's a lot more one-block equipment in the game now, so we don't have to worry so much about that, right? You just put some one-block equipment in a deck, make sure you've got some 3 blocks. They can only play 3 red Snatches. They don't have a lot of other 0 for 4s or on hits, so it's okay to block Snatch and have Snatch be a powerful card. Obviously, you're going to have to worry about something like Snatch Razor Reflex now, which is a combo that's been gone since the WTR, but that might come back again as well. So initial impressions seem to be quite good. I mean, people have played a lot of games, and things seem to be quite sort of positive. People are reporting that it feels like it's low power. They're having a lot of fun building decks. There's a lot of decks being built. I'm not sure why it's dropped off Fab Room, and I'm sure we'll get an explanation about that. And I did kind of say when I was talking about this in my weekly news video that, like, let's not get too carried away. And by that I mean LSS have been very, very clear that their alpha formats, which is what this is, may never make it out of alpha. They may never make it to beta. They may, even if they make it to beta, they may never see production. So let's not get too carried away. This is obviously one idea that LSS are putting forward as an alternative to Blitz, or even potentially as an alternative to Commoner, just to spice up the Commoner side events more. But let's not get carried away and be like, this is definitely happening. At the stage that we are at, there is zero guarantee that this is happening. In fact, based on the way that, things play out, it's better to assume that this is very unlikely to, not unlikely, but this is more likely to not be happening than it is to be happening. It's just an alpha idea. It may go no further than one event in New Zealand. But it is still interesting that LSS are setting up the mechanisms for testing new formats like they are now with alpha and beta testers, alpha testers in New Zealand, beta testers worldwide, and it is very interesting to see their first iteration of what could be an alternative to Blitz and the methodology for reducing power levels in Blitz going forwards. That is what Project Blue is. What are your thoughts on Project Blue? Are you excited? Do you want to try it? Have you already tried it? Are you just going to sit back and wait and see if it becomes the official format? Wait and see what people like me say about it when the testing has been done? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, do like and subscribe. As I've kind of said recently, the new direction for the channel is once a week, I'm going to do a weekly news roundup on Sunday. That's going to keep YouTube happy. That's going to keep my channel in people's minds. And those episodes can be short and they're very easy to edit, though I do want to do some graphical work and get some fun bits done so that they look good. And, I'm now competing with the World Tour News, which has moving news desk banners and all this other stuff that looks really swanky, and they have Imagine Bay and I don't have Imagine Bay and I just have a Dashi, and then again, Dashi's pretty cute. And there's a lot of arguments for Dashi being better than any of the casters who cast Fab. She's not, she's got something unique. She's got character. Anyway, the point is I want to do some graphical work, but basically I'm going to keep YouTube happy with my weekly news update, and then I'm going to keep doing these longer episodes, probably as frequently as I have been doing them, which we all know is not weekly, right? Let's leave it that way. To the people who are still listening, who have listened to me for a while, I do have consistent listeners. I do thank you very much. You and I both know that every time I say I'm going to do weekly episodes, and these episodes need to be 45 minutes or half an hour, and they need to have deep context and stuff like that, it doesn't happen. I get traveling for work, stuff happens, I get busy. So I will continue to do these episodes when important things happen, when there are interesting topics that I have opinions on in detail. And then I'm going to start doing those weekly news episodes about things that are happening in Flesh and Blood. I already have bits to talk about this week. I have to talk about recent bans and suspensions. I have to talk about LSS's new weekly news. I have to talk about whether or not Aura's going to Living Legend this season. Loads of great stuff to talk about in that 10-minute segment. But that will be more weekly, and I will promise I need to be more consistent with it. And maybe that will go right out the window when I get a second dog or something like that, but we'll give it a try. And these episodes will still continue to come out. So anytime you see something big happening in the Flesh and Blood world, just continue to think, do I want to know what Steelfur says about this? And if you do, then come on over, and I will try and have a video out for it reasonably promptly, talking about why it's a good idea or a bad idea. And remember, as always, the ethos of the channel is I am here to take things from the perspective of a customer, a consumer, a player. I'm not here to talk about how, everything is perfect and everything is rosy. I am here to advocate for things that are good and things that are bad. To me, Project Blue is a really great example of why I like LSS as a company. Let's take this idea, let's test it, let's run with it. It doesn't have to be a high power, high spend, high value format. If they launch Project Blue, it will be singly the greatest pro-consumer move that LSS has done in its history. Because they'll have launched a format, which their entry-level format, where the cost to buy a deck is like less than 20 quid. It will be the single greatest pro-consumer move they have ever done. Right? Put that in context. That's why I'm so excited about it. It will remove a lot of people being like, well, I don't want to get into Fab, it's so expensive. We can be like, yeah, but this is your deck for until you decide that you love the game. And then you can come and play in a Pro Tour or a Grand Prix with a constructed deck. Or you can go and play sealed, and you can play limited, and you never have to buy a classic constructed deck, because you'll go to a calling and you'll spend your weekend, as I have done, and it's really fun, just playing side events. Right? The calling in London, I didn't have a dog sitter, she dropped out. I went home at lunch every day to walk and dog sit my dog and have lunch. I played one side event in the morning, went home at lunch and walked the dog, played another side event in the afternoon. I played Living Legend, Blitz, Classic Constructed, and Sealed. I had a fantastic time. And if I had not played Living Legend and Classic Constructed, I still would have had a good time. If I had played Commoner, I would have had a good time. If I had played Project Blue, I would have had a good time, because I would have been playing Fab. So, the point I'm trying to make is, if they do this, and this is entry level and really fun, people might just play this and then do Sealed and go to a calling and do Draft, and may never buy into Classic Constructed. And that's okay too. Let's give people other ways to get into the game that are fun and also bring that full Flesh and Blood feel and experience. Blitz was fundamentally broken, unfortunately, and it's good to see LSS, after all this time, acknowledge what I and many others have been saying for years. This is one road to take us out of there. To acknowledge the fact that the faster Fab format has been too powerful for some time, and to move forward and see where we get to after that. So, as always, thank you for listening, and speak to you all very, very soon.